Television is not the truth. Television is a goddamn amusement park. Television is a circus, a carnival, a traveling troupe of acrobats, storytellers, dancers, singers, jugglers, sideshow freaks, lion tamers, and football players. We're in the boredom-killing business. So turn off your television sets. Turn them off now. Turn them off right now. Turn them off and leave them off. Turn them off right in the middle of the sentence I'm speaking to you now. Turn them off.
Stop them. An idea whose time has come cannot be stopped by any army.
Welcome to another episode of Eradicating program Ignorance, the Town Crier. I am your host, Roger Landry, and as we do every week, we are going to jump in to topics that present a danger to not only us as Americans, but to global society and indeed humanity. We have been doing a switch off between issues of health and issues of politics and tyranny, which I consider to both be equally important and equally as dangerous in the world we live in today. Today we're going to start a three-part series on basically what has happened to America in the 21st century. What has happened to the world in the 21st century? In all of this, we have three presidents that need to be discussed, and that is George W. Bush, and that is Barack Hussein Obama, and that is, of course, Trump, Donald J. Trump. We're going to start off by trying to understand or give you the information to understand why such massive changes in the last 2.5 decades. Well, we're approaching the last 3 decades at this point, being that we're bumping up on 2019 and we're discussing the dawn of the 21st century. So what we're going to do is we're going to go over each one of these presidents and either the legacy they've left behind or the legacy they're developing. What we're going to do is start with Baby Bush. And we have to start with Baby Bush because a lot of the major changes that we suffer, and yes, I use that word correctly, that we suffer as Americans today really blossomed in the very, very early 2000s. I guess you would say probably the linchpin for all of this would be 9/11. So, without further ado, we're going to jump into and take a lot of reference from an article I wrote to cover just exactly this topic. And the name of that article is From Freedom to Fear, the Bush Legacy. And here we go. The labels Democrat, Republican, liberal, conservative, progressive, or NEOCON are simply tools to engage and divide the masses, to play us against one another, and to keep us distracted while the true tyranny is perpetrated, hidden in plain sight. Even those who would claim these titles in leadership are but pawns in this game, a game we the people are never intended to be permitted to win. So let us awaken and delve into the misdirection, the hypocrisy, the tyranny of misguided patriotism, and the deceitful, false show of concern for the welfare of America, because to continue in ignorance sounds the death toll for this once great nation that is now in crisis. And if you can look around and tell me you don't live in a nation in crisis, I will tell you that you are either the king or queen of the sheeple, because we are in crisis in multiple fronts in this country. We are closer, a lot of global watchers are stating, to nuclear war than we have ever been in our history. And we still have a deep state that is doing everything in their power to try and take down a sitting president. So, when I say this great nation now in crisis, it's a true statement. To help demonstrate the validity of this argument, let's examine, as I stated, George W. Bush. This modern day politician will be seen in the history books future generations will read from as a patriot. But if we examine his deeds, then reality is a shocking wake up call for those who have been lulled into these beliefs by the lies and misdirections of the puppet masters via the most powerful and efficient propaganda tool ever to exist, the mainstream media, the fake news, the MSM. So let's excuse me, let's do a characterization or a snapshot of the Bush presidency. We start with Bush, quite in character, as a right-wing neoconservative kowtowing to the corporate military-industrial complex, which boomed under his administration. Immediately following 9/11 incidents, which is another story of lies and deceit, but we'll go into that at a later date. This country geared up for war, spurred on by the fervent rhetoric of his administration. Cries of revenge and retaliation were, contained in every speech we heard and every public address he made. The American people were whipped into a patriotic froth, waving flags and looking to extract their pound of flesh. Any Muslim, regardless of their actual nationality or allegiance, was looked at with unwarranted, based on blatant lies, fear. Fear is the most effective form of control over mankind ever developed or devised by man's mind, and serves only to perpetrate hate and protracted ignorance. This gave rise to the most expensive, expansive, destructive manhunt in the history of this planet, but was in reality a perfectly choreographed and pre-planned exercise in smoke and mirrors, lies and deceit. No, not kidding. No price in national treasure, respect, or even human life was too large to be suffered in order to find and kill Osama bin Laden, the devil incarnate. So we pumped up the military machine and proceeded to invade and occupy Afghanistan. After an extended period of time, bin Laden was was thought to have escaped through the mountain pass of Tora Bora into Pakistan. Well, we did not leave Afghanistan, but we settled in to rebuild the country as we, or to be more precise, the puppet masters thought it should be, all the while raping its society for all the gains the international banking cabal and the soulless corporate criminal elements could extract from it. And a new term was coined: nation building. At this point, we also began performing cross-border raids into Pakistan, another sovereign nation, and sending predator drones in to kill anyone who opposed us or our goals in the name of finding someone we were being told at the time was already dead. Okay, more on that again in another article. Next, we were told that Iraq was an imminent threat to our national security because they had weapons of mass destruction, including the makings of a nuclear bomb, even though the information available to the administration at the time showed conclusively. Listen to what I'm about to say. You all know I don't say things I can't back up. So, at the time, the administration had information that showed conclusively that Iraq and Saddam Hussein were willing to do anything to avoid war with the USA. Anything at that point. So again, the nation was lied to and whipped into a frenzy to support another invasion of another sovereign nation on what we were told was a mission of extreme patriotic importance, justified by the need to protect the homeland. Really? Protect it from who? Protect it from what? It seems very clear to us now that these questions many of us should have been asking, but weren't. But the finely tuned engine of propaganda, the MSM, was very effective and successful in quelling any dissenting rhetoric at all. Why do I say that? I remember the face of a president on TV staring out at all of us with eyeballs that could have been spikes at the time. And what did he say? You're either with us or you're with the terrorists, which means there is no room for dissent. There's no room for questions. There is no room for could we be wrong? There is no room for are the American people being lied to? You are either with us or you are with the terrorists. That sent a chill through my spine at that point in time when I first heard that, beyond anything you can believe, because you have to remember, I spent almost a decade in the military and almost 2 decades working for the military industrial complex on weapon systems across this planet. But that shocked me. And that's part of the reason why I started to wake up. Again, at this point in time, no price in national treasure, respect, or human life, both American or Iraqi, was to be spared. We marched in and decimated a country where the people enjoyed one of the highest standards of living in that part of the world or in a lot of the world, and we bombed it back to the Stone Age, eventually killing millions and poisoning generations to come with massive utilization of depleted uranium ammunition. And guess what? No weapons of mass destruction. At this point, you would think any decent, peace-loving nation would have left. But again, not us. Again, we settled in for another long session of, here we come back to that term again, nation building. Again, raping its society for all the gains an international banking cabal and corporate vultures could extract from it, and contrary to the lies being told, will remain in both countries in force today. Okay. The winners. Who are the winners? Or who were the winners? The military industrial complex, who continue to make billions from these wars. The CIA drug lords, who now control 90% of the world's very lucrative heroin market through the poppy fields in Afghanistan that thrive because they have U.S. military protection. Not kidding. The oil companies, who again, with the protection of the American military, might are firmly entrenched in the region, began the process of building a pipeline through these acquired nations to control the sweet crude needed to prop up the failing petrodollar. Again, another story. The international banking cabals will immediately set up central banks in these countries. The corporate power brokers who continue to suck the life's blood out of anything worth stealing from these sovereign nations' economies. And the crooked politicians who supported these unnecessary wars and in turn profited from them in favor or treasure. So those are the winners. Who are the losers? The losers. The people of the sovereign nations we invaded and occupy, with millions of innocent civilians dead, maimed for life, or displaced from their homes that no longer exist, and the massive numbers of stillbirths, birth defects, and cancers that will plague these nations for many generations to come. The American people, with well over $1 trillion that we are allowed to know of, wasted on these imperialistic endeavors, which were never, ever, ever proven to have been done for the reasons we were told they were done for, and the untold billions more each year that this madness continues. The dead American servicemen who were deceived into believing they were giving their lives to protect a homeland that was never in danger to start with, and I dare anybody to show me how. I'm not a military ignorant. Believe me, I'm not. It was my life. And what else? Why else are we losers? The respect for this country, once seen by the world as Camelot or the shining castle at the top of the hill, and now thought of as the 800-pound gorilla or bully on the block, hated and feared even as the old USSR rarely was. How many Americans are even aware that these wars were all planned in detail in the mid to late 1990s during the Clinton years? Not a guess, a fact. 7 nations, including Afghanistan and Iraq, were put on a hit list. 5 of these nations being in the Middle East, and all with one thing in common. They had no central banking system tied to the international banking cabal, who via a very powerful oligarchical controlled the ebb and flow of capital and wealth across the globe via institutions such as the U.S. Federal Reserve. But a catalyst was required to set all this in motion. They needed a reason. They needed a catalyst. What was that catalyst? Duh! 9/11. Yes, this event was a mighty convenient occurrence for something already planned, but I digress. As of this point, Bush is in character as a full-blown neocon. But as bad as this is, we the people get punished even more because it gets worse. G.W. Bush, while claiming to be a true conservative, is in fact responsible for initiating the largest at the time, because the guy who takes over for him does him proud. Okay. He was at the time responsible for increasing spending and the national debt by the largest amount in the nation's history. Very un-Republican, wouldn't you say? This was done on several fronts, those being massive military spending required to fight 2 wars simultaneously, massive tax cuts to large and favored corporations, and in his second term, a series of stimulus packages and corporate welfare or bailouts designed supposedly to help put this country back, on its feet. We were in a deep recession. Yeah, I called it a depression. And it was caused basically by the housing bubble collapse. This economic collapse was the result of horrendous mismanagement and criminal misuse of billions, if not trillions, of dollars entrusted to the world's preeminent financial institutions, but yet no one goes to prison, because these are in fact the puppet masters who own the political system and the politicians, including said president. So while the middle class embarks on a downward death spiral, our government and Federal Reserve begin to pump what would eventually exceed an estimated $16 trillion, a total far exceeding the entire federal debt at the time, and some say many times this amount, internationally in loans, bailouts, and corporate welfare into the very entities responsible for the catastrophe to start with. And all of this coming from basically Federal Reserve institutions. In essence, it can be argued that the criminal perpetrators got rewarded for their misdeeds, and the innocent masses got what may still eventually prove to be a fatal bitch slap, administered by our trusted elected representatives, led by Baby Bush. It is not only our treasury and world respect that suffered catastrophic losses during the Bush years, but also our liberties, rights, and freedoms. For those of us who reported to reside in the land of the free and the home of the brave, this may be the worst of the Bush legacy by a long shot. Prior to Bush, the citizens of this country could not even conceive of institutions or laws controlling and usurping our freedoms and rights on the scale that was being done on a daily basis via mechanisms such as the NDAA and the Patriot Act, a name ill-suited for its intent and ramifications. Then we were forced to contend with the expanded powers of the TSA, Homeland Security, and FEMA, as well as others we may not even be aware of. What we observed in the name of safety and security was our rights and freedoms being watered down and trampled on in a progression that continues at an accelerated pace. Witness the birth of a police state. Surely our founding fathers, who sacrificed so much to bequeath us our Constitution and Bill of Rights outlining our God-given freedoms, liberties, and unalienable rights, are rolling over in their graves. We must also contend with the fact that during his administration, this government grows in leaps and bounds, including its size, scope, influence, and intrusion into our daily lives. List of what most people would describe as very liberal, even progressive, and in some cases criminal policies and actions go on and on and on, all perpetrated by a supposed right-wing conservative, anti-big, intrusive government Republican. Try saying all that in one breath. Can anyone explain the basis for any of this in context with the stated Republican platform? Is this even a supposed Republican mindset? Or is this the blurring of the party definition by those who own the party? In fact, both parties, and all who serve an intended and predetermined goal. Again, another topic, one we are definitely going to dig into deeply. This is the George W. Bush legacy in all its splendor, and believe me, I barely scratched the surface. A man whose policies followed both progressive liberal and neocon conservative lines of reasoning to a new crescendo of radicalism and benefited only the bankers, Wall Street, power brokers, and the military-industrial complex to the extreme detriment of who? We the people. So, here we have laid bare the actions of a so-called Republican who played the role of a neocon and also a progressive or a Democrat. A man whose actions crossed the entire political spectrum and all its extremes. Bush was railed against, called a war criminal, a murderer, even a tyrant. His economic policies and support of the Federal Reserve's tactics were denounced in 2008 during the presidential election by all major candidates from both parties, especially Obama. Gee, go figure. As being far too radical in nature or as a total abject failure. And his foreign policy was railed on for the imperialistic warmongering it in fact was. His popularity in the lame duck years of his presidency was dismal at best, and we figured anyone would be better than him. We were so very wrong. What was choreographed so brilliantly during the Bush fiasco was the intended goal of bringing a confident, self-assured, and prosperous society to a mindset of constant fear and government dependency. The feeling that we the people must depend on an ultra-powerful and overreaching government to keep us safe from boogeymen of their creation, even at the expense of our liberty. Gee, mission accomplished. As radical as Bush was, as damaging to this country as his economic and political actions and mandates were, and as tyrannical as his freedom-robbing ideals seemed, even this pales in comparison to his success. Freedom-robbing and social-destroying exploits. But that again is another commentary, and that's next week's. Open your eyes to reality as it truly exists today in America, because the time grows short for action or change. And the only alternative is the death of America as we know it. By far the most effective catalyst for the propagation of tyranny on this planet today is from the many who choose not to see. Ignoring tyranny only serves to embolden it. It only serves to embolden those who perpetrate tyranny, and contrary to the beliefs of those who are intentionally blind, only hastens the day when they will have little or no choice but to see. Then it's too late. The time to open your eyes and see is now. At the end of that article we're discussing, or most of the topic today came from, there is a humorous video of Mr. Baby Bush and all of his, I don't know, every time he stepped on himself publicly, every time he misquoted, he misspoke. Anybody who ever considers that Baby Bush was a mental giant is in fact a mental midget themselves. All right, next week we're going to be talking about the Untouchables. Why wasn't Obama impeached? Again, this has been The Town Crier, an episode of Eradicating Programmed Ignorance, brought to you by the Liberty Beacon Project and broadcast on TLBTV. Please take some time, learn some things, eradicate some of that ignorance they've been programming into you. What is happening today only has one means of stopping, and that is we the people. Have a great day. We'll talk to you again soon. Goodbye.